The research vessel Argos didn't just look dead. It looked like a tomb carved from the void itself. It was currently drifting through the center of the Umbra Nebula, a localized pocket of space filled with hyperdense, light-absorbing particles. Out here, photon emissions didn't just fade, they were swallowed. Commander Vex checked the seal on her matte black stealth suit. Her species, the Xylos, were masters of the unseen. She didn't need light. She had the quantum sight goggles, a 4-lens optical array that bypassed the visible spectrum entirely. She saw the ship in vibrant, digitized layers of subatomic vibration, heat signatures, and electromagnetic heartbeats. Vex tapped her comms, broadcasting on an open frequency to the entire ship. Her voice was smooth, melodic, and dripping with a hunter's arrogance. Commander Vex, smiling behind her visor, said, "To the crew of the Argos, I have disabled your primary and secondary lighting. I have cut your internal senses. You are currently stumbling in a darkness your primitive biology cannot comprehend." She signaled her Shadow-Stalker team to breach the airlock. They moved with a terrifying, fluid grace, their boots making zero sound on the metal grating. To them, the ship was a brightly lit map of prey. They could see the panicked huddles of human researchers through 3 layers of reinforced bulkheads. They could see the frantic pulsing of human hearts. Commander Vex, continuing her broadcast, said, "We see the very atoms of your bodies, humans. We see your fear as a heat signature. There is nowhere to hide. Sight is no longer a luxury you possess." A soft, rhythmic click. Click, click, echoed through the main engineering corridor. Vex paused, her 4 violet lenses rotating to focus on a junction at the far end of the hall. Her scanners didn't show a heat signature. They showed a cold, steady mass, moving with strange, rhythmic precision. Investigator Crix, her second in command, whispered over the squad link, "Commander, I have a contact. No thermal bloom, no electronic signature. It's just mass." Vex adjusted her goggles. Through the quantum filter, she saw a man. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was sitting on a crate in the middle of the hallway, holding a long, wooden-handled cane. He was tapping the floor rhythmically. The man was Silas. His eyes were open, but they were a milky, sightless white, reflecting none of the digital glow from the Xylos goggles. Silas, tilting his head as if listening to the very air, said, "You talk a lot, Commander. Most hunters don't like to ruin the surprise." Vex chuckled, her carbine leveled at the center of his chest. Commander Vex, stepping out of the shadows, said, "An engineer? And a blind one at that. You are the only thing on this ship that isn't glowing with terror. Why?" Silas stopped tapping his cane. He reached into his heavy work coveralls and pulled out a long orange cylinder. Silas, his voice calm and gravelly, replied, "Because your fancy goggles are built for the dark, Vex. But this ship is about to get very, very bright." Commander Vex felt a flicker of genuine curiosity. Her species, the Xylos, viewed humans as biological relics, slow, fragile, and hopelessly dependent on the narrow band of the visible spectrum. To find one who had already lost that limited sight, yet sat in the path of an elite kill team, was a statistical anomaly. Through her quantum sight, Silas was a dull, gray silhouette. He lacked the high-energy bloom of her own soldiers, who were outfitted with powered exosuits and active shielding. He looked like a statue carved from the cold, dark hull of the Argos. Commander Vex, her finger tightening on the hair trigger of her plasma carbine, said, "You talk of light, old man, but there is no power in this sector. I have severed the conduits. I have bled the batteries. The only light in this nebula is the light I allow." Silas didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't even stand up. He just rolled the orange cylinder between his calloused palms. Silas, his milky eyes staring at a 0.3 inches to the left of Vex's head, replied, "Your goggles are a masterpiece, Commander. I've read the specs. Subatomic light, dark matter filtering. They can see a heartbeat through a meter of lead because they're tuned to find the tiniest, most microscopic glimmers of energy." Vex felt a sudden, sharp prickle of instinct. She adjusted her lenses, zooming in on the cylinder. It wasn't a battery. It wasn't a bomb. It was a chemical magnesium flare, a primitive 19th century emergency tool. Silas, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper, said, "The problem with a telescope is that it's real easy to break if you point it at the sun." With a sudden, violent motion, Silas struck the striker cap of the flare against the metal crate. Crack. Shh. Shh. The ignition wasn't a spark. It was an eruption. A magnesium flare doesn't just burn. It consumes the oxygen around it to create a searing, blinding white chemical fire that reaches temperatures of over 3,000 degrees Celsius. To a human, it would have been blinding. To the Xylos quantum sight, which was currently boosted to its maximum sensitivity to see in the absolute dark of the Umbra Nebula, it was a supernova. Vex screamed. The high-definition digital feed inside her goggles didn't just white out. It overloaded. The sensors, designed to detect subatomic particles, were suddenly slammed by a trillion-photon surge of raw, chemical light. The optical processors shrieked, a high-pitched digital whine echoing in her ears as the feedback loop scorched the internal circuitry. Vex ripped the goggles from her face, her charcoal gray skin illuminated by the harsh, flickering white glare of the flare. Her eyes, large, dark, and sensitive, were watering, her pupils reduced to pinpricks. Around her, the Shadow-Stalkers were stumbling. One fell against a bulkhead, his hands over his visor, his carbine firing a wild blue plasma bolt into the ceiling. Commander Vex, her voice raw with pain, shouted, "Kill him! Sight or no sight, kill the human!" She squinted through the smoke, her natural vision struggling to adjust to the oscillating, violent white light. The corridor was filled with thick, acrid chemical smoke. Through the haze, she saw Silas. He had stood up. He wasn't squinting. He wasn't shielding his eyes. Why would he? The blinding sun in his hand meant nothing to a man who lived in the dark. He dropped the flare into a bucket of industrial grease he placed at his feet. The fire didn't go out. It spread, turning the floor into a lake of dancing, white-hot flames. Then, Silas reached behind his back. He didn't pull a plasma blade. He pulled a heavy, sawed-off double-barrel shotgun. The wood was scarred, the iron barrels dull and black. Silas, his ears twitching as he tracked the sound of Vex's heavy breathing, said, "Now that we're all equally blind, Commander, let's see who's the better hunter." The engineering corridor of the Argos was no longer a tactical environment. It was a sensory hellscape. Commander Vex pressed her back against the freezing bulkhead, her charcoal gray skin slick with cold sweat. Without her quantum sight goggles, the Umbra Nebula had reclaimed the ship. The only light came from the dying, sputtering magnesium flare, which cast long, violent shadows that danced like jagged knives against the walls. The acrid white chemical smoke was so thick she could taste the salt and metal on her tongue. It didn't just block vision, it dampened the thermal senses of her suit's backup systems. Vex held her breath, her large, sensitive ears twitching. She was a Xylos, a species that evolved in the silent voids between stars. She was supposed to be the master of the quiet. Click. The sound was sharp, metallic, and perfectly localized. It came from the left, near the primary coolant pipes. Vex spun, her plasma carbine whining as it cycled a bolt of superheated energy. She didn't wait for a visual. She fired a blind burst into the smoke. The blue plasma bolts hissed through the air, melting a hole in a storage locker, but hitting nothing but empty air. Click. Now the sound was behind her. Commander Vex, her voice cracking with a rare edge of panic, whispered into her squad link. "Crix, report. Where is he?" Static was her only answer. The flare's magnesium combustion was putting off a massive amount of ionizing radiation, effectively jamming their short-range comms. She was alone in a hall of mirrors, and the mirrors were made of sound. Silas wasn't hiding. He was moving. He used his acoustic echo cane not just to see, but to manipulate. Every click of his cane against the metal floor sent out a sonar pulse that only he truly understood. He knew the exact density of the smoke, the distance to the ceiling, and the frantic, shallow rhythm of Vex's breathing. Silas, his voice appearing to come from every direction at once as it bounced off the curved hull, said, "You're hunting with your eyes, Vex. That's your first mistake. Eyes are easy to trick. They see what they want to see." Vex saw a shadow move in the mist, a tall, broad-shouldered shape. She shrieked and fired again, the blue light of her plasma rifle illuminating the corridor in brief, strobe-like flashes. The shadow was nothing more than a heavy environmental suit Silas had propped up on a maintenance drone. Shack-chack. The mechanical sound of the sawed-off shotgun being racked was the most terrifying thing Vex had ever heard. It was heavy. It was physical. It carried the weight of a century of human grit. Boom. The first barrel erupted. The blast didn't just carry lead. It carried a wall of concussive force that shattered the remaining light fixtures and sent Vex sprawling across the deck. The lead shot didn't care about her sleek stealth weave suit. The pellets shredded the lightweight fabric, peppering the bulkhead behind her with jagged holes. Vex scrambled to her feet, her ears ringing, her sense of balance completely shattered. She realized Silas wasn't aiming for her heart. He was aiming for the walls. He was using the ricochets and the debris to pin her down, to box her in. Click. The cane struck the floor again, closer this time, right in front of her. Silas stepped out of the smoke. He didn't have his eyes open. He didn't need them. He looked like a statue of ancient justice, the sawed-off shotgun held steady in one hand, the cane in the other. Silas, his voice low and steady, said, "I can hear your heart, Commander. It's beating at 140. You're terrified. And terrified prey always makes the same move." Vex lunged forward, drawing a vibrating monomolecular combat blade from her thigh. It was a desperate high-speed strike meant to disembowel. Silas didn't move his body. He simply tilted his head, listening to the displacement of air as the blade whistled past his ear. He stepped into her guard, his heavy, grease-stained palms slamming into her chest with the force of a hydraulic press. He didn't fire the second barrel. Not yet. He wanted her to feel the cold, black iron of the muzzle against her throat first. The freezing metal of the shotgun's twin barrels pressed into the soft, charcoal-gray skin of Vex's throat. The heat from the first discharge still radiated off the iron, a stinging reminder of how close the lead had already come. Around them, the Argos was dying. The magnesium flare had finally sputtered out, leaving only a few glowing red embers and a thick, suffocating blanket of white chemical smoke. The silence that rushed back in was heavy, broken only by the distant, rhythmic thrum of the Nebula's radiation against the ship's hull. Commander Vex reached up with a trembling hand, her fingers brushing against the cold, unyielding wood of Silas's weapon. She was an elite Shadow-Stalker. She was trained to see the invisible. Yet, here she was, pinned by a man who couldn't even see her face. Commander Vex, her voice a fractured, thin whisper, asked, "How?" "Your eyes, they are dead. My technology, it is the pinnacle of the Xylos Empire. I see the subatomic world. You should be nothing." Silas didn't move the gun. He didn't even blink. He stood there in the absolute dark, his face a roadmap of scars and grease, looking perfectly at home. Silas, his voice calm and heavy as a tombstone, replied, "That's your problem, Vex. You think sight is a power. You think it makes you the master of the room. But sight is a luxury. It's a distraction." He leaned in closer, his ears twitching as he tracked the frantic, shallow whistle of her breathing. Silas, a grim smile touching his lips, said, "When you see everything, you stop feeling everything. You didn't hear the deck plates groan under your weight. You didn't feel the shift in the air when I moved the cooling fans. You were too busy looking at your little glowing screens to notice the world around you." He slowly backed away, lowering the shotgun, but he didn't put it down. He tapped his acoustic echo cane twice on the floor. Click, click. Silas, walking toward the manual airlock controls, said, "I've lived in this dark for 30 years, Commander. I know every bolt on this ship by the way it vibrates. I know every corridor by the way it smells. To me, this ship isn't a map. It's a living thing. And you're just a parasite I've finally shaken loose." Vex slumped against the bulkhead, her strength failing. Without her goggles, she felt small, blind, naked. She looked at the milky, sightless eyes of the old engineer and realized he wasn't just surviving the dark. He was the king of it. Silas reached the airlock wheel. He didn't use a digital override. He grabbed the heavy iron wheel and turned it with the raw, mechanical strength of a man who spent his life wrestling machines. The heavy gears groaned, a deep, metallic sound that signaled the end of the Xylos occupation. Silas, looking over his shoulder toward where he knew she was sitting, delivered the cold truth. Silas, his voice a final, gravelly decree, said, "You brought a telescope to a dark room, Commander. I just brought a match. Now, get off my ship before I decide to fire the second barrel." Vex didn't argue. She scrambled to her feet, her pride shattered, and retreated into the shadows toward her docking craft. She moved slowly now, feeling the walls with her hands, finally understanding what it meant to be truly blind. The airlock hissed shut, and the Argos fell into a deep, peaceful silence once more. Silas stood in the center of the dark corridor, closed his eyes, though it made no difference, and took a slow, deep breath of the cold, oil-scented air. Silas, whispering to the darkness, said, "Told you it was too loud in here."